Hi, my name is Ganesh Subramaniam, Product Marketing at Cypress. Today I'm here to give you an introduction to GPIF II Designer. GPIF II Designer is part of the FX3 SDK, which is available for download at cypress.com/FX3SDK. GPIF II Designer is a graphical user interface that lets you describe the state machine that you want to program into the state machine of FX3's GPIF. Now let's examine how the software looks. I have the FX3 SDK installed on my computer, and I'm going to open the GPIF Designer. You will find that once it's open, that it has three main tabs, one for describing the interface, and another one for the state machine, and the third one for simulating the design that you might have built. This is the project management phase, and in there you would find a bunch of default projects that is included in every GPIF II Designer. So if your application would suit one of these default applications, I would encourage you to use it. The most common interface used with FX3 today is a slave FIFO interface, and that's available to you already as a default application, as you can see here. In addition, you would also see recently opened projects. I'm going to open one of those to explain to you how GPIF Designer works. So on this page, you see that there's an interface definition tab on the left and a graphical representation of how this interface would look like. This is a simple GPIF state machine that I'm going to describe here, and all it has is a clock and a data bus. But if you were to add more control lines, the way you might do it is to increase the number of inputs here and the number of outputs, and you should see them appear here on the interface. To describe a state machine, you would first start with a start state. To do that, I'm right-clicking and adding the Add Start State button. Once I do that, you see that the start state appears. To add additional states, I'm going to do the same operation by right-clicking and just selecting Add State. Next, I'm going to create the transition between the states. I'm going to point my cursor to the center of this state and then connect it to the center of the next state. There you see the start state always connects with a logic 1 transition, which means it happens every time. Next, I'm going to create transitions between the two other states that I have described. Now that I have the transitions described, the next step is to describe the conditions under which these transitions can occur. I'm going to click on this arrow symbol. We had one input called input 0, a logic 1 that we saw earlier, and a variety of predefined trigger conditions. These predefined trigger conditions are based on the internal state machine of GPIF. To get a complete description of what these trigger conditions mean, please refer to the documentation included under Help, Topics, Understanding GPIF II Designer, the User Interface, the State Machine, and Transition Equations. Next, let's rename the states to something that makes more sense. I'm going to call this state not DMA ready, and the other state DMA ready. Now I'm going to describe the transition equations for the two arcs described here. For the transition between not DMA ready to DMA ready, I'm going to select one of a predefined trigger condition called DMA ready thread 0. And for this arc, I'm going to choose a not of that condition. Each state can also have an action, and there are predefined actions described here. To add an action, you just select the action and drag and drop them into the state. In this case, I have used the action in data for the state DMA ready. This action is used to latch in data on the bus. For more details on what these actions mean in terms of the GPIF state machine, please refer to Help under Topics, Programming GPIF II, and GPIF II Actions. And again, you would see all the documentation on how to use these actions for GPIF II Designer. Once you have described the state machine, you would click on Compile, and GPIF would then build you a header file which can then be used for your FX3 SDK. As you can see here, once I've built, I should have a cyfxgpif2config.h file generated for this project. Now I'm going to bring over the header file that we just created with the GPIF II Designer into the FX3 SDK. I'm going to open Eclipse, and in Eclipse I'm going to use an existing project called GPIF II USB to show how to use the header file that we just generated. The first step in doing so is to include the header file as shown here. Here you see the hash include cyfx gpif2config.h. The next step is to use two APIs. The first one loads the descriptor into the state machine, and the second one would start the state machine with the interface description that we just loaded. So those two APIs are called cyu3 pgpif load and cyu3 pgpif fsm start. Once you have called these two APIs, then you have the interface as you described, and you can work with the rest of the firmware project like you might in any other FX3 design. Once you have done that, you would build the firmware project, and once it's built, you should see under the release directory the image file, which includes the interface description that you just did using the GPIF Designer. One side note: if after downloading your image you find the interface that you just described is not to your satisfaction, you can then come back into Eclipse and click on the GPIF project right here and open it right from inside Eclipse to go and make modifications and changes. You have just watched a brief introduction to the GPIF II Designer. You saw how to describe a state machine using GPIF II Designer, import it into the FX3 SDK, and build an image with the interface that you just described. Thank you for watching.